Imagine like getting medical advice instantly, right? From, actual doctors for like just a few bucks. Sounds kind of crazy, right? Well, that's the reality for millions of people in China right now who are turning to these online platforms. They're called OHQPs, or online health question and answer platforms. But the big question is, how good is that advice really? That's what we're going to be diving into today.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, actually. These OHQPs have just exploded in popularity in China, and it's mainly because the healthcare system there is, well, it's facing some serious challenges, to say the least. People need options, right? And these platforms are offering this fast and, affordable access to real, licensed physicians.
Okay, so we're not talking about like some random person in their pajamas who just binge watched Grey's Anatomy.
Exactly.
But like, how does this even work? Can you walk us through it?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually pretty simple. Basically, someone needs, medical advice, so they post a question about whatever health concern they have, and then multiple doctors on the platform, they can see that question and choose if they want to respond. Then the person who asked the question can look through all the answers and pick like their favorite one, and the doctor who wrote that answer, they get a small bonus.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's kind of like a medical advice bake-off. The patients get to pick the winner, and the prize is, well, a little extra cash. But that kind of leads us to the obvious question: how often are people actually picking the right advice?
That's that's the real question here, right? So there was this recent study. They looked at over 496,000 answers on one of these popular Chinese platforms. And what they found was actually pretty surprising.
Okay, now you've got me curious. Lay it on me.
So the actual quality of the advice,
Yeah.
the medical advice itself, was pretty good on average. I mean, it wasn't perfect, obviously, but it also wasn't, dangerous or anything. There was, legitimate medical knowledge being shared on these platforms.
Okay, well, that's somewhat reassuring. But how did the researchers actually figure out if this advice was legit or not? Were they just like counting internet points and, I don't know, enthusiastic emojis?
No, no, no. They had a system. They brought in this panel of really experienced doctors to be the judges, and they carefully graded thousands of answers on different medical topics.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like a team of, I don't know, medical superheroes swooping in to like evaluate all the advice. But were they like judging blind? Because like, what if I saw an answer from, I don't know, my old college roommate who barely even passed anatomy? I'd probably be a little biased, right?
No, for sure.
Stop it.
And the researchers made sure that the grading was totally anonymous. No names, no affiliations, nothing that could identify who gave the advice. They even had these doctors rate their own confidence levels in their grading just to be extra, extra sure that they were being objective.
Okay, so we're talking like a high level of scrutiny here. So what was the verdict? Was the advice generally good, or were there like a ton of medical misfires happening?
So here's the thing. For the vast majority of the questions, there was at least one good, solid answer provided. It's not like, people were stuck choosing between only terrible advice. In fact, only about 6% of the answers were actually rated as low quality, which honestly is less than you might think.
6%. That's way lower than I would guessed, honestly. I'm almost tempted to give this OHQP thing a try myself next time I have a medical question, almost. But something tells me there's a, but coming. We're not totally out of the woods yet, are we? You know me too well, right? There's got to be a catch. Come on.
Yeah, you're right. The problem they found wasn't that the advice itself was bad. It's that people, like the patients, were, I guess you could say, surprisingly bad at actually picking out the best advice.
Wait, are you serious? So they had access to, like, good advice, but they weren't choosing it. That's like, I don't know, going to a Michelin star restaurant and ordering the cheapest thing on the menu.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good analogy. And that's a huge problem, right? Because if there is good advice out there, it doesn't even matter if people can't actually figure out which advice is good.
Yeah, that kind of defeats the whole purpose, doesn't it? So, like, how bad are we talking here?
Okay, so get this. The study found that patients only chose the best answer, like the absolute best answer, about 31% of the time. And here's the real kicker. They were statistically just as likely to pick the worst answer as they were to pick the best one.
Oh, come on, you're kidding. So you're telling me they would have been better off just closing their eyes and picking a random answer? You'd think they'd at least do better than a coin flip when it comes to their health, right?
I know, right? And it gets even, I don't know, I guess you could say even more concerning when you remember that these platforms cover everything, like all sorts of medical topics. We're talking, minor stuff to really, really serious stuff. And this inability to pick the best advice was the most obvious for things like pediatrics, so, kids' health, and then also things like cancer and serious internal diseases, that kind of thing.
Okay, now that's just scary. We're talking about like life or death situations here where getting the wrong advice could actually, have really bad consequences.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, why are people so bad at figuring out what advice is actually reliable?
Right, right. So we know patients need like better ways to figure out what's good advice and what's not. But what does that even look like? Are we going to start giving everyone like online medical degrees?
Well, it's not really about like turning everyone into a doctor overnight or anything. It's more about understanding how people, like how their brains work. How we make decisions when we're dealing with really complex information, especially when we're talking about our health.
So talking about like going into shortcut mode when we should really be slowing down and thinking things through carefully, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
We tend to rely on these like mental cues to guide our decisions. But the problem is those cues aren't always reliable. They can lead us down the wrong path sometimes.
Ah. Okay, so when we're talking about online medical advice specifically, what are some of those misleading cues? Like, what are people latching onto that's actually leading them to make bad decisions?
Well, that's what the researchers really wanted to figure out. And they used this like really fascinating approach to try to get inside the minds of the patients. And that was, well, artificial intelligence.
Okay, now we're talking. So, did they like create an AI doctor to give out better advice?
Not exactly. It's like this,
Oh.
they basically made this AI system that could analyze all those medical answers, right? But then it would try to predict which answers a patient would choose based on, just the information available in the answers themselves. They trained this AI on like a massive amount of data from these platforms. So essentially they taught it to, think like a patient who's scrolling through all this medical advice.
Okay, so they basically unleashed this AI patient onto the OHQP platform to see what it would do. What happened? Did it just start recommending chicken soup and bed rest for everything?
It's actually way more interesting than that. What they found was that the AI actually started picking up on these really specific cues that were influencing the patient's decisions, even if those cues didn't actually, correlate with the best medical advice.
Okay, I gotta ask, like, what kind of cues are we talking about here?
So, for one thing, they realized that patients really seem to like gravitate toward longer answers, even if those longer answers were just full of, medical jargon or whatever and weren't actually that helpful in the end. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but people seem to equate length with effort, and they just assumed that, more effort meant better advice.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's kind of like when you're like, I don't know, skimming through online reviews, right? You're more likely to trust a really long, detailed review than like a short one, even if the short one gets right to the point. It's almost like we think more words equals more expertise or something.
Yeah, it's a natural bias we have. And here's another big one they found. Patients really seem to respond to advice that just, sounded comforting, even if it wasn't actually the most accurate or responsible advice, medically speaking. They were drawn to the doctors who basically told them what they wanted to hear, not necessarily what they needed to hear, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally get that. We've all been there, right? We want the easy answer, the one that makes us feel better, the reassurance that everything is fine, even when, like, deep down, we know we should probably be hearing something a little bit tougher.
Exactly. And here's another one, and this one's a little bit concerning. They noticed that patients really didn't like being told that they needed to, like, go see a doctor in person. So even if the advice was accurate, even if it was good advice, if it involved, making an appointment or going to a clinic, they were much more likely to choose a different answer, even if that answer was less accurate, as long as it let them avoid that in-person visit.
Wow, okay, so not only are people bad at judging medical advice online, but they're actually using it to, like, avoid going to the doctor in the real world. That seems, I don't know, kind of dangerous, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a phenomenon they call if care avoidance. And it's a really big concern with these types of platforms. People are like they're using online advice to self-diagnose, self-treat, and like I was saying, just avoid seeking professional help when they really probably should.
Okay, so that's a pretty sobering thought. It's like, how do we make sure people are actually getting good, solid, reliable medical advice online? especially when it seems like our brains are kind of wired to take these shortcuts. So it's like we've uncovered this, I don't know, kind of like a big dilemma. We're saying that these online platforms, they have the potential to make healthcare way more accessible, way more affordable, which is
Mm.
awesome, right? But they're also only as good as the advice that people actually choose to follow. And while we've kind of seen that people are, how do I put this? We're not so good at being our own doctors, even with like all the information in the world at our fingertips.
It's true. Yeah, it really is a double-edged sword. And the thing is, this isn't just a problem, in China or whatever. This is about how, like, all of us, everyone,
Mm.
deals with online health information, which is, let's face it, everywhere these days,
Mm.
especially now with telemedicine and, all that stuff becoming more and more common.
Yeah, it's like the internet has become this massive, like, I don't know, unregulated doctor's office.
Yeah.
And we're all walking around with stethoscopes, but no medical licenses. So where do we even go from here? Like, how do we actually make these platforms safer, more effective, especially knowing that our brains are like hardwired to take these shortcuts that might not be the best for our health?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's, like, one easy answer.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, we can't just expect people to, magically become medical experts overnight. We have to design these online systems in a way that helps people make smarter decisions, even when their gut feeling might be telling them to do something else.
So we have to like outsmart our own brains.
In a way, yeah. Or at least give them the right tools to work with.
Okay, I like that. So what does that look like, practically speaking?
Well, for one thing, we need a lot more oversight from actual experts. It's like, right now, it's kind of like the Wild West out there. People are basically left to fend for themselves with all this information, good or bad. We need ways to weed out bad advice, bad actors, and all that, whether that's, I don't know, stricter content moderation, maybe some kind of peer review system for doctors on these platforms, or even just like a certification or a quality rating system that patients can actually see and understand.
Okay, so almost like how restaurants get graded on their food safety, but for like medical advice. I can get behind that.
Exactly. Transparency is key, right? And we could even think about like different ways of presenting the information too. What if like these platforms actually use little nudges
Yeah.
to kind of steer people in the right direction? Like, let's say someone picks an answer that's been flagged as, I don't know, maybe misleading or low quality. A pop-up could say something like, hey, just so you know, other doctors have said that this might not be the best advice. You might want to get a second opinion, just to be safe.
Well, I like that. It's like having a little digital guardian angel for your health.
Exactly. It's all about giving patients more control, more power to make good decisions, but also being realistic about, how our brains actually work.
Yeah.
We're not always going to make the perfectly rational, perfectly informed choice, especially when it comes to something as, personal and complicated as our health.
Yeah, it's a humbling thought. We like to think we're totally in control, but like you said, our brains don't always cooperate.
For sure. This whole conversation about online health advice, it actually makes you think, doesn't it? Like, if it's so easy for us to be misled when it comes to something as important as our health, what other areas of our lives are being influenced by these, unconscious biases that we don't even realize we have?
Whoa. Yeah, now that is a really good question. It's like that saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? We're constantly bombarded with information online, and it's so easy to just get swept up in whatever's popular, whatever's trendy, whatever confirms what we already believe, without even stopping to think, is this actually true, or is this actually good for me?
Absolutely. So yeah, the next time you're, I don't know, scrolling through social media or you see a headline that seems a little too good to be true, or even, yeah, if you're looking for medical advice online, just take a second, pause, think about it. Don't just accept things at face value. Question your assumptions and remember that, hey, your brain might be trying to pull a fast one on you.
That is seriously great advice, not just for online, but for like life in general, I think. We could all use a little more, critical thinking these days, that's for sure. Well, that just about wraps up our deep dive for today. We hope this got you thinking a little bit differently about, the online world and how it affects all of us.
It's been great chatting with you.
And to everyone listening, stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to question everything, especially your own brain.